Two young men were standing outside the wedding house on a sunny summer day. They were dressed in fine clothes and had flowers pinned to their jackets. "Lucky you, William, to have found such a bride. I even envy you," said one with a sly smile. "Don't be jealous, Jack. You better get married too. There's a lot of girls out there sighing for you." "They're not sighing for me, they're sighing for my money," Jack answered sadly. "I want a wife who really loves me. Besides, you're right. I'm going to get married. Look how pretty she's coming. Why don't I ask her to marry me?" "Young lady," he rushed to the slender blonde who was passing them. "Can you marry me? Do you understand? My fiancée didn't show up for the wedding. She called and suddenly said she wouldn't marry a simple locksmith. What am I going to tell my mother? She has a weak heart." The girl at first froze with surprise and then looked at the other guy, who was laughing. And she smiled too. "I felt sorry for my mother. Besides, I've always dreamed of having a locksmith husband. Why not get out?" And she did. Their wedding was noisy fun. Jack had a lot of relatives and friends. Not like Larissa's. Her mother, yes, two friends. The girl's mother. Olivia was from foster care, and Daddy disappeared in an unknown direction. When he first found out she was pregnant, Olivia tried to find him. She went to his house, but his mom wouldn't even let her in the house. She told her son to go to her relatives in another city. He was offered a job there, so he didn't need any wife, much less a child. And she can't count on their apartment. They only have 2 rooms. It's too small for them. Olivia didn't count on it. She had her own room. It might be in a dorm, but it was clean and bright. And Olivia decided she could manage on her own, surviving and dealing with her own problems. Life in foster care had taught her that. The girl even managed to be happy. No, she didn't get married again, but her daughter became a real ray of light for her. Jessica grew up to be kind, beautiful, and very smart. She finished school well, went to an institute, and had already received her diploma this summer. Just in time for her return, they were given a 2-room apartment in a new house. The old one had been demolished, but Jessica didn't live there long. Now she moved in with her husband, who had his own 3-room apartment. Jessica and Jack lived there. They lived well. They loved and respected each other. Jack was the envy of all their friends and Jessica's friends because it was rare to find such a beautiful and happy couple. But happiness did not last long. After 3 years, Jessica became seriously worried that she could not get pregnant in any way. Jack tried to reassure her. They say, "We still have time for young girls to live for themselves. We'll go hiking in the mountains," but Jessica insisted on the examination. The doctors said that both of them had slight problems, but in principle, they should not interfere with pregnancy. Then Jessica went to another clinic. There they were told the same thing. Wait, in time everything will work out. But 3 more years passed and nothing happened. Jessica began to catch herself thinking that she blamed her husband. She harbored resentment. And Jack began to drift away from his wife, began to stay at work more often, to go to meetings and corporate parties without her. Happiness gradually, but noticeably melted away and disappeared from their family. Jessica once gently offered Jack to take a child from the orphanage, but he flatly refused. She did not insist. She herself understood that another man's child could hardly glue their relationship together, and she had no right to make him unhappy either. Perhaps that was to be the end of their happiness, what had happened one night. Jack came home late, but Jessica hadn't gone to bed yet. She sat in front of the working television set, completely unaware of what was on. Jessica thought about how many people live without children, just loving each other and happy. Why couldn't she and Jack be like that? Maybe because she's looking for someone to blame, and there isn't one. It's just their fate. Jessica heard her husband enter the apartment and rejoiced. She would tell them now. Ask him to forgive her, and everything would be all right. She rushed into the hallway. "Jack, I have something to tell you," she exclaimed and froze. Something was wrong. "I'll go first." Jack sighed heavily. "Just you listen to me quietly, please." Jessica felt her breathing becoming labored. She listened as her husband told her about a wonderful girl named Isabella, about how he had long tolerated, tried to be a faithful husband, but was no longer able to hide his love, that Isabella was expecting a child from him. That is why he wants to file for divorce and move in with her. Jessica listened and understood nothing. She wanted to cover her ears with her hands, to shout for him to shut up and go to bed, that such jokes just disgusting. But she could say nothing. She stood there, staring at him with her eyes wide open, frozen, not her ears from the horror of what she had heard. "Jessica, can you hear me?" He touched Jack, his wife's shoulder. "Will you tell her what?" "Tell who?" Jessica interrogated the helper, trying to understand what he was asking her. "Will you tell Isabella that we've been meaning to divorce for a long time? She won't agree to marry me. She says you can't build happiness on someone else's misfortune. She's afraid for the child. I'm begging you. We haven't loved each other for a long time anyway, and the child needs a father. You know that, don't you?" Jack looked at his wife hopefully, and she suddenly laughed out loud and went into the bedroom. He never went in there that night. A few days later, when Jessica had calmed down a little, she did tell Isabella on the phone what Jack had asked. No, she did not think of his love for another man's girl, did not believe that this Isabella is so honest and right. After all, her correctness easily allowed her to sleep with another man's husband. No, Jessica felt sorry for the unborn baby. She knew what it was like to grow up without a daddy, to be jealous of the other kids, to dream that daddy would come someday with a big doll and tell her he loved her and would never leave again. She agreed to the divorce. She let Jack go, but she didn't stop loving him. As time went on, Jessica lost weight. Olivia only sighed bitterly, watching how her daughter was worried, and tried more often to throw her out of the house in the park. Jessica gradually got used to these walks and even began to walk without her mother. She even liked it better when she was alone. One day during such a walk, she sat down on a bench. Moms were walking by her with strollers or just holding hands with babies. Jessica listened to the laughter of children, shouts, and mothers, and smiled bitterly. God had not given her such happiness. "Don't you have children?" Suddenly, she heard someone's quiet voice next to her. Jessica turned sharply, and only now noticed that an elderly woman was sitting next to her. She wanted to say that it was nobody's business, but the woman's kind eyes and soft smile stopped her. "God did not give me such happiness," yet Jessica answered her. "Apparently, he thought I wasn't worthy. Maybe you think you are not worthy. Do you need an intercessor, daughter? Go to church, do not be lazy, find an icon. Pray as you know how. At least in your own words, ask her for help. Your life will be better and you will have a baby. But sincerely ask her from your heart." Larissa turned away from the woman. She thought that it was as if she had just gone, prayed, and there was happiness for you and a child. With a smirk, she wanted to ask her about it, but she saw that no one was around. Jessica looked around, but the woman was nowhere to be seen, as if she had never been there. The next day, Jessica came to work in the morning, but the boss had declared the day off for some reason. Everyone was happy and quickly dispersed. Jessica was the only one who didn't want to go home to an empty apartment. It was the beginning of summer. The day was warm and sunny, so she didn't take the bus. She decided to take a walk. Suddenly, she heard church bells ringing. Jessica froze. She remembered the stranger's words, hesitated a little, and yet slowly walked towards the temple. There were a lot of people. The priest was reading something in a beautiful low voice, and the women's voices were gently singing along to him. There were many candles burning all around, and flowers were everywhere. It was so cozy and peaceful that Jessica even smiled. Is today some kind of holiday? Very quietly, she asked the young girl standing next to her. Don't you know? Today is the feast day of a saint. She is my intercessor. She helped me to survive the accident. My mother prayed to her for me. And now both I and the girl bowed and crossed with the other parishioners. And shivers ran down Jessica's back. It was all too strange. All these coincidences. She bought a candle, walked over to the icon, in front of which stood a large vase with a huge bouquet of roses, lit this candle from one of the many others already burning, and began to pray. Jessica didn't know prayers, so she just started telling her everything. From the beginning. Told her and cried, not at all embarrassed that someone would see her tears. A year went by. Jessica calmed down. She forgave Jack and learned to enjoy life again. One day, she stayed late at her mother's house and took a cat home. There was no one in the yard, but when Jessica reached for the doorknob, two young men suddenly jumped out. They were arguing, shouting, and grabbing each other's chests. The door slammed shut. Jessica hadn't had time to go into the entryway, and now she couldn't get past the fighting men. So she stepped aside a little and waited for them to calm down. But the boys had no intention of reconciling. On the contrary, now they were waving their fists at each other. Suddenly, Jessica saw a knife flash in the hand of one of the fighting men, and she covered her mouth with a gasp when one of the guys started to fall to the ground. But the real scare came when the other with the knife went right at her. Jessica couldn't scream or run from fear. She became dizzy and fainted. She woke up to someone shaking her by the shoulders and slapping her cheeks. Jessica opened her eyes and saw a man she didn't know, and lying on the ground next to the wounded man was the other guy, the one with the knife. The guy was tied up. He was cursing and twisting, but he couldn't get free. "Who are you?" In a faint voice, Jessica asked, and the man smiled in relief. "She's awake. That's good. You hang in there. An ambulance is coming to help." His name was Harry. He was ex-military. Single too. Harry was walking by when he saw what happened in Jessica's driveway. He managed to wrestle the knife from the bully, then saved her life, quickly tied the guy with his belt and pants, called the wounded man an ambulance, and began to bring the young woman to her senses. By the way, noting to himself that very beautiful. The next night, Harry called at Jessica's apartment. When she opened the door, the first thing she saw was a large bouquet of white roses, just like the one in front of the holy icon that day. 6 months later, they were married. Harry was 12 years older than Jessica, but she was not confused by the age difference. He was reliable, considerate, and honest. Before the wedding, Harry did not hide, told Jessica about his first marriage, that he cheated on his wife only once, but she has not forgiven him, as he did not ask her to forgive him. He still can't forgive himself, especially for the fact that his wife had an abortion after his adultery. After telling him all this, Harry was silent for a long time, and then he asked Jessica if she would have forgiven him if she had been in his wife's shoes. Jessica thought about it and answered honestly that she wouldn't forgive him, but she wouldn't kill the baby. He was not to blame for his parents' sins. Then Harry hugged her and promised never to cheat on her. She believed him and admitted that she probably couldn't have a baby with him either. At least it hadn't worked out for her with Jack. Harry listened to her and firmly told her that then he would love her alone. But if she wanted to, they would have a foster baby. And 2 months after the wedding, Jessica felt a terrible craving for pickles. She called her mother to ask her how to keep him safe. And Olivia cried instead of answering for some reason. Why do you think that is?